The 69 aircraft from the two Japanese carriers succeeded in sinking carrier Lexington and damaging Yorktown. In return, the Americans damaged the Shikaku. Although Zukaku was left undamaged, aircraft losses to Zykaku were heavy and the Japanese were unable to support a landing at Port Moresby. As a result, the Mo operation was cancelled. 32. Although they managed to sink a carrier, the battle was a disaster for the IJN. Not only was the attack on Port Moresby halted, which constituted the first strategic Japanese setback of the war, all three carriers that were committed to the battle would now be unavailable for the operation against Midway. 33. Midway. Yamamoto perceived Operation Me, the capture of Midway, as the potentially decisive battle of the war which could open the door for a negotiated peace favorable to Japan. 32. For the operation, the Japanese had only 4 carriers, Akijai, Kiga, SRY and Hyori. Through strategic and tactical surprise, the carriers would knock out Midway's air strength and soften it for a landing by 5,000 troops. 32. After the quick capture of the island, the combined fleet would lay the basis for the most important part of the operation. Midway was to be bait for the USN, which would, in Japanese calculations, depart Pearl Harbor to counterattack after Midway had been captured. When the U.S. Pacific Fleet arrived, Yamamoto would concentrate his scattered forces to defeat the Americans. Concurrently with the attack on Midway, an important aspect of the scheme was Operation L, the plan to seize 2 islands in the Aleutians to deny American forces the use of bases close to Japan. 32. Contradictory to persistent myth, Operation L was not a diversion to draw American forces from Midway. The Japanese wanted the Americans to be drawn to Midway, rather than away from it. 34. However, American code breakers had deduced an attack on Midway was imminent and American forces, including 3 carriers, were deployed from Pearl Harbor to the Midway area, unknown to the Japanese. The battle began on June 3, when American aircraft from Midway spotted and attacked the Japanese air transport group 700 miles, 1,100 kilometers, west of the atoll. 35. On June 4, the Japanese launched a 108 aircraft strike on the island, the attackers brushing aside Midway's defending fighters but failing to deliver a decisive blow to the island's facilities. 36. Most importantly, the strike aircraft based on Midway had already departed to attack the Japanese carriers, which had been spotted. This information was passed to the 3 American carriers, and a total of 116 carrier aircraft, in addition to those from Midway, were on their way to attack the Japanese. The aircraft from Midway attacked, but failed to score a single hit on the Japanese fleet. In the middle of these uncoordinated attacks, a Japanese scout aircraft reported the presence of an American task force, but it was not until later that the presence of an American carrier was confirmed. 36. Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo was put in a difficult tactical situation in which he had to counter continuous American air attacks and prepare to recover his Midway strike, while deciding whether to mount an immediate strike on the American carrier or wait to prepare a proper attack. 37. After quick deliberation, he opted for a delayed but better prepared attack on the American task force. After recovering his Midway strike and properly arming aircraft. 37. However, beginning at 10:22 am, American carrier dive bombers surprised and successfully attacked 3 of the Japanese carriers. 38. With their hangar decks full of fueled and armed aircraft, plus discarded bombs and torpedoes, all 3 carriers were turned into blazing wrecks. Only a single carrier, the Hyori, remained operational, and she launched an immediate counterattack. Both of her attacks damaged the Yorktown and put the carrier out of action. The Yorktown along with the destroyer Haman were later sunk by the Japanese submarine I-168. Later in the afternoon, aircraft from the 2 remaining American carriers found and destroyed Hyrie. With the striking power of the Kido Butte having been destroyed, Japan's offensive power was blunted. Subsequently, on the early morning of June the 5th, the Japanese cancelled the Midway operation and the strategic initiative in the Pacific was in the balance. 39. Impact of Midway. Although the Japanese lost 4 fleet carriers and the worst consequences of Midway being the loss of experienced aircraft maintenance personnel, NB1, Mark Petty states that the engagement was not the battle that doomed Japan. 42. The outcome did not lead to the end of the highly trained carrier crews, 43, or radically degrade the fighting capabilities of Japanese naval aviation as a whole. 44. The Japanese only lost 110 aircrew during the battle, mostly from the Hyrie with American aircrew losses being far greater than the Japanese. 43. The Japanese still had more warships of every category than the United States had in the Pacific, and the combined fleet still possessed 8 aircraft carriers, twice as many as the U.S. Pacific Fleet. 45. Additionally, while the United States did have 3 large carriers in the Pacific, in comparison to Japan's 2, the Japanese vessels had a total capacity for 382 aircraft, compared to 300 on the American carriers. Also, the Japanese had another carrier already fitting out to join the fleet and tow more in the later stages of construction. The American industry would deliver only small escort carriers during 1942, of which more than 2/3 were sent to the Atlantic. The massive shipbuilding program would not get into full gear until the following year. 45. Consequently, for the time being the Japanese retained the advantage. As for naval aircraft, the Japanese were as strong as they had been at the beginning of the war. Until May and June 1942, air losses had been limited and aircraft production had kept pace with losses. From the beginning of war through the end of June, Japanese naval aircraft losses totaled 1,641. 45. Almost half of the losses occurred during the months when the battles of Coral Sea and Midway took place, with the large majority in June, including many at Midway. Over the same period Japanese aircraft deliveries numbered 1,620. NB2. Additionally, what was not of a major concern was pilots, as aircrew casualties at Midway were not so severe and the large majority of aircrew of the Kido Butte returned despite the sinking of their ships. These were bolstered by 2,000 newly trained pilots in 1942. NB3. Guadalcanal and the Solomons, 1942-1943. On the 7th of August, 1942, U.S. Marines landed on the islands of Guadalcanal and Chileji in the Solomons, putting the Japanese on the strategic defensive for the first time in the war. 46. Vice Admiral Gunishimikawa, commander of the newly formed 8th Fleet at Rabaul, reacted swiftly. Gathering 5 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and a destroyer, he sailed south and attacked the Allied naval force off the coast on the night of August the 8th. 9. Mikawa's quick response resulted in the Battle of Savo Island, in which 4 Allied heavy cruisers were sunk with no Japanese ships lost. 46. This was the worst defeat ever suffered with U.S. Navy while at sea. 46. Only mitigated by the failure of the Japanese to attack the vulnerable American transports. Aside from Mikawa's initial reaction, the Japanese were slow to respond, seeing the American landings as reconnaissance in force. But by mid-August they had assembled 4 battleships, 5 carriers, 16 cruisers and 30 destroyers to dislodge the Americans. On the 24th of August, 1925, the IJN launched an operation intended to send a small transport convoy to the island and also to destroy any American naval vessels in the area. The ensuing Battle of the Eastern Solomons was the 3rd carrier battle of the war. The IJN achieved neither of the goals, with the convoy diverted to the Shortland Islands and the American Navy still present. Japanese losses were heavy, with 75 carrier aircraft, a light carrier, a transport, and a destroyer lost. 46. Although the American carrier Enterprise was damaged, she managed to elude Japanese attempts to sink her. With the Americans' Henderson Field on Guadalcanal now operational, convoys of slow transports couldn't go near Thailand without great risk. Consequently, until the airfield was suppressed, Japanese reinforcements were most often delivered by inefficient destroyer runs to the island by night. 46. By early September, destroyers had delivered 6,200 troops for an attack on the American perimeter. 47. But Japanese had underestimated American forces on the island, assuming there were only 2,000 Marines were on the island. The actual number was about 20,000. The attacks launched by the Japanese on the nights of the 12th of September, 2014 therefore failed. The Japanese did better in the struggle for control of the waters round Guadalcanal. On the 15th of September, the submarine I-19 sank the carrier Wasp, leaving only a single American carrier, the Hornet, active in the Pacific. 47. But although the Japanese possessed up to 6 operational carriers during the same period, they failed to capitalize on the opportunity. 47. By now the Japanese realized that Guadalcanal was a pivotal contest. 47. So for the next offensive an entire army division was assigned, with plans to get it to Guadalcanal by mid-October for an offensive beginning October 20. To support this effort, the combined fleet stepped up night runs by destroyers and high-speed Z-plane carriers, which carried the soldiers' heavy equipment, to Guadalcanal, and a transport convoy was assembled. Aerial bombardment of Henderson Field would be intensified, and surface warships would bombard the airfield. Admiral Yamamoto now defined the combined fleet's primary mission as supporting recapture of the island, with destruction of the U.S. Pacific Fleet a secondary objective. 47. On the night after 13th of October, 2014, the battleships Kong and Haruna bombarded the airfield on Guadalcanal with 918 14-inch, 36 centimeters, rounds, destroying over 40 aircraft and putting the airfield temporarily out of commission. 47. Mark still notes that despite Japan's pre-war preoccupation with a titanic clash of battleships, this was the most successful Japanese battleship operation of the war. 47. The convoy arrived during the night of October 14-15, preceded by 2 heavy cruisers which shelled the airfield. Aircraft from 2 carriers flew cover over the transports. American aircraft succeeded in sinking 3 of the 6 transports, but not before a total of 4,500 men had landed along with 2/3 of their supplies and equipment. 47. The Japanese kept up the pressure with another cruiser bombardment on the night of the 15th of October, 2016 and more reinforcement destroyer runs. After several delays, the Japanese began the offensive on the 24th of October. The main attack finally commenced on the night of the 25th of October, 1926, but the attacks on Henderson Field were repulsed by the Marines with heavy losses. 48. Santa Cruz. Concurrently with the Army's offensive on Guadalcanal, the IJN planned their largest naval operation to date in order to counter and defeat any American naval forces operating in support of the Marines on Guadalcanal. 48. The combined fleet departed Truk on the 11th of October with a force of 4 battleships, 4 carriers, 9 cruisers, and 25 destroyers. In addition, the 8th Fleet in Rabaul contributed 4 cruisers and 16 destroyers. On the 25th of October, Yamamoto ordered the combined fleet to engage the anti-aircraft shell bursts, fired at attacking Japanese aircraft, Phil Fesky above USS Enterprise, center left, and her screening ships during battle on the 26th of October 1942. Americans. Just after midnight on the night of the 26th of October, an American PBY patrol aircraft located the Japanese fleet. Finding the Japanese force just before dawn, 2 SBD's dive bombers from the Enterprise attacked the Zui and scored a pair of hits that damaged its flight deck, consequently starting numerous fires on board the carrier. However,